Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to really get into some complex ideas, the kind that theologians and philosophers debate for centuries, and try to make them clear and accessible for you.
And today, we're tackling a big one, a really profound question at the heart of Christian thought about God's presence.
Exactly, we're asking this. Did the second person of God the Son, before he was incarnate, did he actually personally show up in space and time, before becoming human, before the Incarnation?
It sounds maybe a bit abstract at first, but the answer, or how we approach the answer, well, it shapes everything. It tells us about God's plan, about salvation history, about the very nature of reality.
And we're grounding this discussion in some specific theological arguments, looking at interpretations of Scripture, too, like that passage in 1 Kings 22, where Micaiah sees the Lord on his throne.
That's a classic example. Micaiah sees this vision, the Lord on his throne, the heavenly host all around. It immediately forces the question, was that really God, unveiled? Or was it something else, a representation?
Okay, so before we dive into the different viewpoints on this, we need to make sure we're all on the same page with the terms. It's crucial for understanding the sources we're drawing on.
Definitely. So first off, second person of God. We mean the Son, eternal, existing before creation, before time as we know it. Collectively as the source notes.
Right. And creature. This isn't just humans and animals.
No. Critically, it's everything created. Angels, humans, the universe itself. And crucially for this discussion, space-time, UFOM, is also considered a creature in this framework.
That's a mind bender right there. Space-time itself is created, limited.
It has to be, if God is truly infinite. Which leads us to the actual throne.
And this isn't just a metaphor for power, right? We're talking about the real deal, the unmediated center of divine presence and authority.
Precisely. The place, if you can call it that, where God's unfiltered presence is. Not just his power, but his being.
Okay, got it. So the whole discussion rests on a foundational starting point, a premise, or as the source puts it.
Yes. And it's this. God is infinite, limitless, absolutely boundless. Everything that exists, everything that doesn't exist, the eternal, the temporary, it's all within God. Nothing is outside him.
Nothing. So God is everywhere, always. That's a given.
Absolutely. Omnipresence isn't the question. The question's about manifestation. Did God choose to reveal himself directly, personally, unfiltered to creatures within their created reality of space-time before the specific events of the Incarnation and the cross? That's the deep dive for today.
All right, let's get into this central paradox then. If God is infinite, already everywhere, sustaining everything, why all the fuss about how he appears? Why would he need to, hold back?
Well, the holding back, as you put it, isn't about God's limitations. It's entirely about the creature's limitations, specifically creatures who have free will, the capacity for sin, that unperfected state.
So it's dangerous for us.
Immensely dangerous. There's a massive theological risk and existential risk involved in a direct, unfiltered encounter with the divine presence for a creature capable of sin.
The risk of annihilation. We hear that term, but let's flesh it out. Why would the very source of life be deadly?
It's because God's fundamental nature is absolute holiness, utterly separate from sin. The analysis we're looking at argues that creatures who can sin, who carry that potential or actuality, simply cannot withstand seeing God in his raw essence. They can't survive it.
So it's like light obliterating darkness. The holiness is so pure it just consumes anything less.
That's a good way to think about it. The sheer, uncontainable reality of God's presence meeting a flawed, sinful state would result in consumption, spiritual death, annihilation. It's an incompatibility issue.
Which means God hiding himself isn't about being distant. It's actually an act of profound mercy, preservation.
Absolutely. It's the theological requirement for keeping creation intact. The sources emphasize this. God has to conceal himself, veil himself, to prevent wiping out creatures whose free will hasn't been perfected or redeemed.
So if God, either the Father or the Son, had just decided to sit on that actual throne fully manifest before dealing with the sin problem,
all creatures, everyone with that capacity for sin, would simply perish. That's the stark reality presented here. The universe couldn't handle it.
this links back to that idea you mentioned, God manifesting as holiness, which implies separation.
Yes, that separation defines the relationship before the ultimate solution. For God the Father to eventually become all in all, for his presence to permeate everything safely, space-time itself has to be cleansed first.
Cleansed of sin and death.
Right. And that cleansing isn't just a divine snap of the fingers. It requires the cross. It requires the final judgment, the white throne judgment, to utterly remove sin and death from the created order.
Okay, so this is why the Incarnation, the second person becoming a creature, is absolutely central. It wasn't just plan B.
It was the only way. The second person had to become a creature to enter the created realm from within and neutralize sin and death through his life, death, descent into Hades, resurrection, and judgment.
That whole process is the necessary preparation.
It's the prerequisite. Without the Son taking on creaturehood and accomplishing that victory, creation simply cannot bear the direct, unmediated presence of the infinite God.
Okay, so we've basically established a kind of cosmic safety protocol. Unmediated God plus unperfected creature equals destruction.
That's the core principle derived from these sources, yes.
If we accept that, then any view suggesting either the Father or the Son was fully present on the actual throne before the cross seems, well, problematic from the start.
Deeply problematic for the creature's survival. The entire way God interacts with creation, the divine economy, seems geared towards protecting creatures from the consequences of their own state until redemption is secured. This holiness constraint, let's call it, becomes the benchmark.
The measuring stick for the different views on who, if anyone, was on that throne before the Incarnation.
Exactly. If a view requires creatures to survive something that, according to this principle, should annihilate them, the sources argue it must be incorrect.
All right, this is where it gets really interesting. Based on this need to protect creation, let's dig into the first three possibilities the sources consider and why they're ultimately rejected.
And keep in mind, a recurring issue with these first three views is that they often make the Incarnation itself seem almost redundant. If God was already fully present and ruling in that direct way, why the drastic step of becoming human?
Okay, view one. Simplest on the surface. Both the Father and the Son were there, on the actual throne, fully manifest before the Incarnation.
And the error, war, is immediate, based on what we just discussed. If both persons were there, unveiled, then creatures with the potential for sin must have been seeing God directly.
And surviving, which breaks the fundamental rule.
It completely contradicts the holiness constraint. It would mean that Scripture's warnings about seeing God and dying, or the whole concept of separation due to sin, were somehow not accurate.
Or didn't apply in this supposed scenario.
Right. And think about the significance of Emmanuel, God with us. That name, that reality, is proclaimed with such weight after Jesus' birth.
Yeah, it's presented as a new thing, a revolutionary reality.
Exactly. If the second person was already fully with us, in that ultimate unmediated sense, sitting on the actual throne, well, the Incarnation announcement loses its punch, doesn't it? It becomes less, God is now with us, and more like, God continues to be with us, just in a different form.
It downplays the radical nature of God becoming flesh. It's not just a change of clothes, it's bridging an impossible gap.
Precisely. It undermines the idea that the Incarnation fundamentally changed the relationship, the possibility of presence. The analysis also flags that if the Son was already on the throne, why the later need to become like an angel? But the main point is the violation of the holiness constraint and the diminishing of Emmanuel.
Okay, what about you two? This one tries a different approach. Only the first person, the Father, sat on the actual throne. The Son wasn't manifesting in space-time yet. Maybe that solves the problem.
The sources argue, no, it doesn't. The error, Guriera, is essentially the same. It still fails the holiness constraint.
Because the Father's presence would be just as lethal.
Exactly. If creatures still carried the potential for sin, they'd be just as unable to survive a direct encounter with the Father's unmediated holiness as they would the Son's. The analysis really pushes against separating the visibility or the impact of the divine essence between the persons.
But hang on. Couldn't someone argue there's a difference in roles, maybe? That the Father's mode of being, pre-incarnation, allowed for a kind of presence the Son didn't have until he became incarnate? Is the danger really identical?
That's a fair question, and it touches on deep Trinitarian theology, but the perspective here insists on the co-equality and the shared divine essence. Think perichoresis, the mutual indwelling. If they share the same divine nature, the ontological danger posed by that nature's unmediated manifestation should apply equally.
So if one person's unfiltered holiness is consuming,
then the other person's must be too. Otherwise, you risk implying a difference in their essential divinity, which contradicts orthodox Trinitarian doctrine.
So trying to solve the problem by saying only the Father was visible doesn't work because it either breaks the holiness constraint or it messes with the concept of the Trinity itself.
That's the argument presented. If direct manifestation is fatal to the unperfected creature, then no person of the Godhead could sit unveiled on the actual throne until sin and death were dealt with.
All right, view 3. This one is probably quite popular, I imagine. The idea that only the second person, the Son, sat on the actual throne. This is often used to explain Old Testament appearances, right? Theophanies or Christophanies.
Yes, it's a common interpretation. But according to this analysis, it runs into the most trouble, logically. Theme here is multifaceted. First, it still hits the same wall. If the Son was on the actual throne, unveiled, then creatures were seeing God directly and surviving. It breaks the primary rule again.
Okay, the holiness constraint still applies.
Yeah.
But you said there were other issues.
Yes, big ones, especially around sovereignty. Think about it. If the second person already held the supreme ruling authority, sitting on the actual throne governing space-time before the Incarnation,
Then why the whole narrative of him becoming a creature, laying down his authority, dying, and then crucially receiving authority back?
exactly. It creates this bizarre loop. You have the eternal king reigning from the ultimate seat of power. Then he chooses to become a subject, a creature. He lives, he dies. Then, after his resurrection, he says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me."
Given. Why would it need to be given if he already possessed it from the actual throne?
That's the logical inconsistency. It makes the entire process seem theologically redundant. Why give up ultimate authority only to regain it later, specifically as a resurrected creature?
So the sequence matters. The fact that he receives authority after resurrection suggests he wasn't exercising that specific kind of creaturely authority before.
That's the interpretation here. His authority as eternal God is one thing constant, infinite. But the authority he wields as the victorious creature king, reigning over creation to defeat sin and death, that's something earned, won, and bestowed through the process of incarnation, death, and resurrection.
If he was already on the actual throne, why become Adam?
Yeah.
Die, resurrect, become like an angel, career, just to ascend to that same actual throne. But now as a creature, it feels backwards.
It lacks theological economy, let's say. Now, the source does acknowledge a potential counterargument.
Right, that maybe he became a creature primarily for atonement or to demonstrate God's love, not necessarily to gain authority he didn't already have in some sense. Does that fix the throne paradox?
The analysis suggests it doesn't fully resolve it. While atonement and demonstrating love are absolutely central purposes, they don't quite explain the specific sequence involving the relinquishing and receiving of authority tied to the throne. If his rule was already perfectly established from the actual throne, why did the atonement process need to culminate in a change in his status on that throne from eternal God to resurrected creature king?
So the core point remains. The Incarnation wasn't just about showing up differently. It was about fundamentally changing the mode of divine rule and presence to make it safe and accessible for creation, specifically to becoming a creature himself.
Yes, the rejection of these first three views really hinges on that need for creature preservation. The creature's state dictates how the king can appear.
Okay, so if views 1, 2, and 3 all stumble over this holiness constraint or create theological redundancies, that brings us to view 4.
Which the sources we're examining strongly support. The view that neither the first nor the second person personally manifested or sat on the actual throne in space-time before the Incarnation. NX, none of the above were seated.
This view emphasizes God's hiddenness as, paradoxically, the very thing that protected creation.
Precisely. It hinges on fully appreciating God's absolute immeasurability and the created nature of space-time itself. Hashtag 3.1, God's immeasurability and hiddenness.
The sources point to scripture here, like in 2 Chronicles, saying, even the heaven of heavens you cannot contain God.
Right. If the highest conceivable created reality can't hold him, then certainly no temple, no specific location within space-time, not even a heavenly throne as perceived by creatures, could actually contain the infinite God.
And this loops back to that definition we set up earlier. Space-time itself, the whole framework of our existence, is a creature.
Exactly. It's created, it's finite, it's dependent. God isn't just in it like water in a container. He transcends it utterly. He isn't bound by its rules or limitations.
Let's pause on that because it's huge.
Mm-hmm.
If space-time is a creature, what does that really mean for how we think about God's presence? Does it mean reality itself is fundamentally incapable of hosting the infinite?
In its raw, unmediated form, yes, that's the implication. Space-time, being creaturely, has boundaries. God exists beyond those boundaries. The source even uses this striking phrase. From God's perspective, space-time is as if without it. Goya, Jioka?
Wow. As if it's not even there, from his eternal viewpoint.
It suggests our concepts of past, present, future, sequential time. These are features of the created system, not fundamental aspects of God's own being. He experiences reality, presumably in an eternal battle. Now, that encompasses all of our timelines simultaneously.
That really shifts things.
Yeah.
So when we talk about God being always present everywhere,
We have to draw a sharp line between that constant, sustaining omnipresence and a specific, personal, unmediated manifestation.
and view 4 rests heavily on this distinction.
It's the absolute key. God is always present, holding everything together. But the very fact that creatures, even sinful creatures, exist within that omnipresence without being instantly obliterated is proof, the argument goes, that God is actively hiding himself. He's veiling his full glory. He isn't personally manifesting in an unmediated way.
Okay, let me try an analogy. Is it like the sun? The sun's energy permeates the solar system, makes life possible, presence, but looking directly at the sun itself, unfiltered, would blind or destroy you. Manifestation.
That's a really good analogy. The sustaining power is everywhere, essential for existence. But the direct, unveiled source is too intense for the unprepared observer. God's sustaining presence keeps the house of space-time standing, but his sitting on the actual throne in the living room, unveiled, would incinerate everything not fireproofed by grace and redemption. The hiddenness is the life support system. Hashtag 3.2 explaining Old Testament appearances. The angel of the Lord.
Okay, but here's the big challenge for view 4, isn't it? If neither the Father nor the Son manifested personally, what about all those Old Testament stories? Micaiah seeing the throne, Jacob wrestling with someone, Moses and the burning bush. These sound like direct encounters. How does view 4 explain these without just dismissing them?
This is critical, you're right. The source offers a specific explanation. Those individuals did not see the unmediated God himself, Father or Son.
Wait, so when the text says the Lord appeared to Abraham or Jacob wrestled with God, you're saying it wasn't actually God. That sounds like it's contradicting the text.
The analysis argues it's not contradicting, but defining the mode of that appearance, the mode necessary for survival. What they encountered, according to this view, was an intermediary, an angel, a divine messenger sent in the name of God.
An angel acting as God.
Acting with God's full delegated authority, carrying out his commands, representing his rule. This is why Scripture can say God is present where his name is placed. The name represents the authority and power, but it's being wielded by a created being, the angel, in a way that doesn't annihilate the human observer.
Okay, so Jacob wrestled with an angel who had God's full authority, making the struggle divinely significant. But it wasn't the infinite essence of God himself in the ring. The danger was real, but mediated.
Precisely. The encounter was genuinely from God, empowered by God, representing God, but filtered through a created intermediary for safety. This model is reflected, the source argues, in the temple concept too.
The temple model, how so?
The earthly temple and even the heavenly scene Micaiah witnessed are described as models, patterns of the true, uncontainable reality. God puts his name there, indicating his authority and willingness to meet his people through that designated system, but he isn't physically contained within it.
And this wasn't just for humans. The source says even angels needed this mediation.
Yes, that's a key point. God isn't even contained in the highest angel heaven. Before the Incarnation and the changes it brought, even angels, glorious as they are, couldn't gaze upon the unmediated divine essence. They also operated under this principle of preservation. The angel of the Lord served as the necessary interface for all creatures interacting with divine authority pre-incarnation.
So every Old Testament theophany was, in this view, actually an angelophany, a manifestation of an angel bearing God's authority.
That's the interpretation presented to maintain consistency with the holiness constraint. It's a mediated manifestation of authority, not a direct manifestation of essence.
Okay, if the Son wasn't manifesting personally, sitting on a throne, he was still present, right? He wasn't absent from his creation before the Incarnation. How does view 4 describe his presence then?
It's described as pre-incarnate immanence, deeply present, but not visibly manifest in the way we might think. The key verse cited is John 1:10. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him.
He was there, the world existed because of him, but he wasn't recognized, wasn't visibly enthroned.
Exactly. He was the underlying reality, the sustaining power, like the operating system running silently in the background, not the icon on the screen.
That's a helpful image.
The source puts it starkly. Space-time exists within the Son. Oh, he upholds it, sustains it. This itself proves he is inherently greater than space-time. just as the Father is greater than all creation.
Citing John 10 there, my Father, who has given them to me, is greater than all, and I and the Father are one.
Right. If the Father is greater than the created all, and the Son is one with the Father, then the Son is also inherently greater than the created realm of space-time. It's dependent on him.
So the Incarnation wasn't about the Son entering space-time for the first time.
No, he was already immanent, already sustaining it. The Incarnation was about him taking on the nature of space-time's inhabitants, becoming a creature himself. A radical move required for salvation, not just for presence.
So pulling this together, if U4 is correct, and neither person was sitting on the actual throne before, then the moment the second person became a creature was truly revolutionary. It wasn't just a change in location. It was God deliberately entering the created order as part of it to fix it from within.
Absolutely transformative. It shifted the entire dynamic from an infinite God sustaining creation from, as it were, outside its limitations, to God becoming a participant within those limitations to achieve the ultimate goal, defeating sin and death.
And the sources point to 1 Corinthians 15 as the roadmap for this post-incarnation phase.
Yes, verses 24 to 28 are presented as crucial for understanding the Son's role after his resurrection and ascension. It outlines his specific temporary kingship as a creature.
Let's really focus on this passage then. It's key to the end game, according to this analysis. The Son, eternally greater than space-time, enters it, lives, dies, resurrects, and then becomes king of creatures.
Right. And this kingship, exercised as the resurrected God-man, has a very specific job description outlined in verse 25. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet.
He must reign. It's a necessary phase, and it's temporary until.
Exactly. It's a remedial reign. It has a defined purpose and a defined endpoint. And verse 26 tells us the purpose and the final enemy to be conquered.
The last enemy to be destroyed is death. His entire reign is focused on eradicating death and everything that leads to it, sin, rebellion.
Correct. And how did he gain the position to conduct this reign? By becoming human, dying as the representative Adam OU, conquering sin and death in his own person, resurrecting as a perfected being described metaphorically as becoming like an angel in terms of his glorified, immortal, creaturely state, and then ascending to the actual throne as that victorious creature.
Okay, so that's the key difference. His ascension to the actual throne as a creature is what makes divine rule finally safe and accessible.
That's the argument. Because he is now ruling through the medium of his perfected, resurrected, creaturely nature, other creatures can finally behold their king, interact with his reign, and not be destroyed. His creaturehood becomes the bridge, the safe interface.
So pre-incarnate God on the throne means death for sinners. Post-resurrection God-man, the creature king on the throne, means life and the defeat of death.
Precisely. His reign secures eternal life because he is actively dismantling the enemies of creation from within the created order as its rightful, victorious king. He reigns until death itself is gone. Hashtag 4.2, the ultimate submission and synthesis.
But the story doesn't end with Jesus reigning eternally as this separate creature king, does it?
Yeah.
The passage goes further. What happens after all enemies, including death, are under his feet?
This is the next crucial step, detailed in verse 28. Once the Son's specific remedial work as creature king is complete, once everything is subjected to him, he does something remarkable.
He submits himself.
Yes. When all things are subjected to him, then the Son himself will also be subjected to him who put all things in subjection under him. He submits the now perfected kingdom back to the first person, the Father.
What does that submission signify? Is it him losing status?
Not losing status in his divinity, but signifying the completion of the specific temporary mission he undertook as a creature. His work as the conquering king is done. The problem he entered space-time to solve is solved. The temporary reign established to fight sin and death has achieved its purpose.
And the result of this submission, when the perfected kingdom is handed over.
Verse 28 concludes that God understood here as the Father, the first person, may be all in all. The Father then becomes the Lord of all this sin.
All in all, that sounds like total saturation, complete presence.
It represents the ultimate state of synthesis. Because sin and death have been utterly removed from creation by the Son's work, the Father can now fully indwell his creation, permeates everything, without any risk of destruction. The original holiness constraint is finally overcome.
Wow. So the end isn't just a restored kingdom under the Son, but a creation fully unified with and indwelled by God the Father, and at this point the Son.
He returns, in essence, to his eternal mode of being, fully co-equal with the Father, his specific creaturely mission accomplished. The Incarnation and the mediatorial kingship were the necessary bridge to get from a fallen creation to one where the infinite God can finally be, all in all, safely.
It brings us back full circle, almost, but to a state far greater than the beginning. It confirms that original premise about God's infinity, too.
Absolutely. Even when the Father is all in all, he is still infinitely greater than the creation he indwells. Space-time, now purified, has become a suitable, sustainable dwelling place for God and for perfected creatures within him. Hashtag 4.3, the enduring mystery for creatures.
Okay, so we have this picture of ultimate victory, purification, synthesis, God fully present. But the analysis adds one final kind of humbling note, doesn't it? About the creature's perspective even then.
Yes, even in that perfected state, a question remains about the inherent limitations of being a creature. Will creatures, whose existence is fundamentally within space-time, ever be able to fully comprehend or perceive the unmediated essence of the first person, even when he is all in all?
So the environment might be safe, but our fundamental nature as finite beings might still limit our perception of the absolute infinite.
That's the lingering mystery the source points to. Our consciousness, our reality, is intrinsically tied to the created order. Can a finite mind truly grasp the limitless reality of God, even in glory? The analysis suggests perhaps not entirely.
It underscores the vastness of God.
It does. It summarizes the whole perspective. God is eternal, infinite, the ground of all being and non-being. Creatures are bound by space-time, by sequence, by finitude. We simply cannot, by our nature, fully grasp that ultimate reality.
Any knowledge we have is purely a gift, a revelation.
Exactly. We can only know God as much as he chooses to reveal himself in ways we can receive. Space-time is his creation, sustained by him, but he's not defined or limited by it. And that fundamental difference is why the whole plan of salvation involving veiling, incarnation, and mediated kingship had to unfold the way it did, always prioritizing the creature's preservation. Hashtag outro. So what does this all mean?
So after diving this deep, what's the big takeaway? It seems the analysis points to divine manifestation, God showing up, as anything but arbitrary. It's incredibly deliberate, carefully measured. Almost like God's main concern pre-cross was protecting creation from his own overwhelming holiness.
That seems to be the core argument, yes. A profound act of restraint, calibrating his presence until the way was cleared by the second person becoming a creature, winning the victory, and reigning as that safe, accessible creature king.
The implication feels huge. Everything we experience, this entire reality of space and time, it's all God's property. He made it. He keeps it going. But he's not trapped in it. He's utterly free from its limitations.
And the greatest paradox might be that his very act of hiding, of veiling his glory for millennia, was the ultimate act of love and preservation for the creation he intended to save.
Which brings us back to that mind-bending idea about time. If God really is, as the source suggests, as if without space-time, if our past, present, and future are just features of this created system he transcends, what does time even mean to him? Does it imply that his entire plan, from the first spark of creation through the incarnation, the cross, the reign, the final submission, that ultimate all-in-all state, is it already accomplished, already present in his eternal now, even while we experience it unfolding step by painful step?
That is definitely the kind of question this analysis leaves you wrestling with, an infinite mystery for our finite minds.
Something profound to mull over. The sheer scale and intricacy of it all.
It underscores the depth and perhaps the unexpected ways of divine wisdom and planning.
Well, thank you for guiding us through that incredibly complex theological territory. It's given us a lot to think about.
It was fascinating to unpack this particular analysis. Thanks for the deep dive.